This is a laboratory tool and equipment drawing review where I will show you how to use and edit over 130 vector illustrations. So let's jump in. When you download the drawings from Simplified Science Publishing, you'll get 3 files: an Adobe Illustrator file that can be opened both in Adobe Illustrator and Affinity Designer, a PowerPoint file, and a zip folder where if you open that zip folder, you will get access to all SVG files labeled for all of the illustrations in this bundle. And if we look at this Adobe Illustrator file, this is the main file you're going to use if you want to customize or edit any of these illustrations that are laboratory tools and equipment for your scientific publications and presentations. And if you click the Artboard button in Adobe Illustrator, you'll see that there are over 138 artboards, and each of these artboards, for example, if you look at the Eppendorf tube artboards and zoom in using Command plus on a Mac, use Control if you're on a PC, and you can see that each of these artboards correspond with specific illustrations such as the Eppendorf tubes, the methods and schematics, the Petri dishes, and much more. So let's do a brief review of all of the artboards on this file, where it starts with 2 figure templates, one that is a 2-column figure width and one that is a 1-column figure width. You can use these to then create a copy of this file, and if you're creating some sort of figure that includes methods, maybe you'll be copying and pasting some of the assets here to create your own figures for publication, double-clicking and editing all of the elements to have the gene name and the promoter name, and adjusting the color of all of the shapes and strokes within this file. So these are fully editable, and that's the power of this file. Everything on here you can adjust and edit to customize for whatever color scheme or whatever specific genes or whatever method diagram that you need to use for your own scientific publications. And in this next section, I'm going to just briefly review the method schematics, where you can see each one of these artboards. If you double click them and look at the layers, they're groups where it's this group made of a lot of different shapes already made for you, and you can be adjusting the properties of these shapes. For example, this gradient. Let's say you wanted this to not be a red gradient, but instead an orange gradient. You can be adjusting all of the elements in this figure, and I do recommend right now, I'm using my own custom colors by selecting, but I will point out that at the bottom of this file, there's a very handy color template tool where I've already selected groups of colors, both bright and dark color schemes, where this group of colors is already pre-approved to be good for people who have color blindness. Same with this blue, orange, and purple palette and this palette. So if you want to have palettes that you already know and trust, and you don't have to think too hard about what color am I going to make this color scheme, know that you can use this color palette to, again, adjust this, where I can use the eyedropper tool using I as the shortcut, and I can make this orange color scheme, and I'll ungroup it to make it easier to touch, but I can just go through and select all of these shapes to customize it for whatever color scheme I want to use. For example, I'm adjusting this red gradient to now be an orange gradient by using this color eyedropper tool and combining it with my already pre-approved bright color palette. And you can change the size of this with selection tools and vector points. So just be aware that, again, every single element on this document is fully customizable. You can customize all of the vector points of all of these illustrations to match whatever you need for your scientific illustrations. So the next set I want to just briefly review is the laboratory tools. And in this set, you have a lot of options, a lot of different syringes. Again, if you wanted to be customizing these, you can go in and either isolate them by double clicking the group to see that group layer, or if you want, you can click on it, ungroup it. I use Command-Shift-G to ungroup, and you can see that I can click on each of these individual lines. Let's say I only wanted 3 measurement lines, that I might have 3 different volumes, and I may want to adjust this image to show that I'm injecting 3 different volumes. And let's say I wanted to have this not be a blue color, but I want it to be a red color. Again, this is the power of this file. It's a template that quickly lets you adjust whatever it is you want. Again, you can make this a more pink color for whatever in the syringe, using all sorts of tools in both Illustrator and in Affinity Designer if you prefer to use that tool. So fully customizable, and just be aware that if you are customizing these, pay attention to any adjustments you may make and regroup and resize for anything. So again, if I take this, I can copy it, paste it, and move it to a file and have an illustration on my figures that go along with my graphs however I want. So there's a lot of syringe options, there's pipette options, there's a lot of Eppendorf tube options. I even have some blood vials. I have blood vials that have been through a centrifuge. There are a lot of different Petri dish options, some with cells that are already inside the dish that you can customize. Let's say you had a mix of different cell types. You don't have to use this cell type. You can add your own shapes to the bottom of this dish. You can adjust the colors of whatever these are. You can also, again, be using that color palette provided here to be making whatever makes sense to you in your illustration. So if I wanted this illustration that I'm going to ungroup to have some blue or purple cells in the center, you can see that I just use the eyedropper tool to create my own cell type, and I can adjust the stroke width, group this, and make a mix of cells at the bottom of this dish. I can adjust the color of these cells. I can adjust the size of these cells. And like I said, the whole point of this is just to prove to you that there's lots of different ways you can start to use this file to create your own custom designs. Make that purple. Had to ungroup some things to get it to use my eyedropper tool in the right way. But again, that's the power of customizing these files. There's a lot of experimental paradigm options here that you can adjust and customize, as well as 6 well to 96 well plates, as well as maps for your Petri dish. Let's say you're doing an experiment where you're plating specific things on different quadrants. There's a handy tool there. So fully customizable, use them however you want. The next section I'll review is the plasmids and molecular assays. These are fully customizable plasmid maps, and there's lots of different options here on these maps, some with text, some with colors, and again, you can adjust all of these colors however you want. Each of these are just shapes, and there's multiple plasmid options. There's an RNA-seq, there's a microfluidics chamber, there's representations of artificial intelligence, and there's just a couple sample graphs and panels of different molecular assays if you're trying to represent, a molecular panel for proteomics, genomics, etc. This can be a great panel to use. and customize as needed. There's also a laboratory equipment and symbols section with microscopes, lenses, various recording devices, computers, symbols of the lab, paper if you need to have something sort of a documentation symbol, as well as people symbols. There's behavioral assays. So if we zoom in here, these are a number of different empty cage types, as well as some examples of how you may want to use these if you have to do a behavioral assay for recording devices with rodents. There's even this mouse where if you want to use this mouse in other ways, you can copy and paste and use the mouse for a behavioral assay, or in this case, if I zoom out, you could also use it in whatever way you want. So some of these are grouped, but you can separate these illustrations and use them however you want. And there's also in the behavioral assay a split chamber with 2 different floor types, an example of food and water. And then there's this electrical symbol. So if you do need to have something represented with an electrical schematic, all those elements are here with an example full illustration. There are the color templates, which I mentioned before, where you can have bright, dark, and gradient templates. These are also great background templates for cellular backgrounds. And even this little blank template where if you want to maybe start with something like this blue and red and teal combination template, but you want to make it slightly your own or change one of the colors, you can use these squares to the side to decide however you want to adjust the color scheme. So if you wanted to customize and create your own color palette that you use, you're welcome to do so here by using the color picker and making fills or stroke templates that make your workflow a lot more efficient when you decide on a color scheme and just copy and paste and use that color scheme over and over again as your templated colors. And finally, the final file I want to review is this text symbols and glyphs section, where in Adobe Illustrator and Affinity Designer, there are these symbols because you can't just insert bullet points. If you want bullet points, you need to actually insert bullet symbols. If you want the alpha, the beta, you're going to want to have these text symbols. So all of these are text elements, and you can copy and paste and use these instead of having to search for them elsewhere, which can be just a handy shortcut to have the symbols here. With a final mention for the power of these glyph symbols. So many people don't know that in Adobe Illustrator, you can actually use this emoji 1 character type so that this text symbol, which is a text emoji, you can actually double click this and see that there are many different symbols already here in Adobe Illustrator, a lot of the nationalities. And let's say you wanted to create some sort of symbol for an audio recording, or you're doing an experiment with sound, you can double click on this element and see that I've inserted these symbols. And the most powerful thing that I want you to know about inserting these glyphs is that each of these is now a text element. So these are all text elements. If I wanted to take this text element and make it custom, not just have it be this audio symbol, I can actually have this symbol and go Object, Expand. And what you'll see is that this is no longer a text symbol. This is now actually a group that you can edit. So all of these different shapes, I can now edit this color. If I wanted this to be a green color, I can. This is fully editable now. These are vector points. So if I click on each of these individual shapes or subset of vector points, you can customize these emoji symbols to be whatever you want. So if you're doing plant biology, This can be a great way to customize some of your plant symbols to represent different experiments. If you're doing timing symbols, there's glyphs in this Emoji One panel, and Adobe Illustrator allows you to adjust these however you want without the need to reference them. They're yours for commercial use. They're yours for whatever use you want. So be aware that that can also be a very powerful shortcut when it comes to using this file. And I know this is an Adobe Illustrator file, which not every scientist feels fully comfortable using. So that's also why, as part of this laboratory tools and equipment bundle, you will see that there are also PowerPoint and SVG files. So if I open this PowerPoint file, what you will notice is that each of these illustrations shown here in the Adobe Illustrator template have been pulled out as separate transparent PNG files, where, let's say, I am more comfortable working in PowerPoint, I can add my text here and adjust this file. And again, let me adjust this to be a gene name, the right font size for a figure. You can then use these templated schematics that have blank spots. You can use these templated schematics, which some of them I've already, in this PowerPoint file, allowed it to be editable in PowerPoint. So you actually can use this file if you're not comfortable creating the shapes yourself and editing the things yourself in Adobe Illustrator. There's some great templates you can start to use and even adjust these arrows in PowerPoint. So I've tried to make as much as I can editable in this PowerPoint file. Again, if you're going to want to try to change the color of the syringe, that is where you're going to need to learn how to edit the SVG or Adobe Illustrator file. But again, if this is your fast place and you want to be just using this PowerPoint file to show your methods, this is here for you to use as you learn how to use more sophisticated tools for editing SVG and Adobe Illustrator files. So another good starting point if you just want to use PowerPoint to create your figures or to make your own custom plasmid maps. This is a great way to just have a transition before learning how to use all of the files and artboards in Illustrator. And if you want to edit something in this file, let's say you do want this red syringe and you just want this artboard 13 that you edited and you want to put it into a PowerPoint file, know that that's the power of this file as well. I can go to File, Export, Export As. I can just export that specific artboard 13 that I've edited. So using artboards, I can export the new red syringe. I can make it a transparent background. Click OK. And if I go back to my files, you'll see that I have that tool there. And I can pull that illustration into my file. So that's where you can customize and then maybe finalize in PowerPoint. If you want to be finalizing your figures in PowerPoint, that can still work out well if you want to use a combination of the two. And the final point I want to make here is that I've included the color palette on the PowerPoint file, because if you want to add a shape and create your own custom shape, let's say you are making cell types in PowerPoint instead of in Illustrator, you can still use this color palette, because I have the shape and the fill where, let's say I don't want an outline, but I want my shape fill to be following my color map here, and I want it to be this teal color. I can just use this eyedropper tool to change the color of my PowerPoint shapes and have a very consistent color scheme that's already conveniently here for me. And the final thing I want to review is, again, we downloaded all of these SVG files, and you can edit SVG files in a lot of different ways. You can edit them in Inkscape. You can edit them in other SVG editing tools. So if there does come a time when, let's say, you want to open up this plasmid map in a different tool or separate in Adobe Illustrator, those SVG files will give you the power to use them and edit them outside of Illustrator or in any SVG editing tool with full power to customize the illustration. And that's the end of the review of the laboratory tool and equipment drawings. And be aware that if you want to look at other drawings that are available, you can go to simplifiedsciencepublishing.com/science-images to see all the science images and templates available that include things like biological diagrams with multiple cell types, DNA strands and vector brushes, animal models, and much more. Thanks for watching and have a great day.